Well, looks like looks like this is probably going to be the majority of us. So we'll just go ahead and jump in. So tonight we're going to do something slightly different. Well, of course, we'll review the things, and then we're going to watch a brief 15-minute TED Talk about the beauty of conflict, and we'll have a little bit of discussion on that afterwards, and then we're wrapping it up, y'all. So that'll be it. We'll jump right in. Get my notes set up. Triple A's that feed conflict: feeling like you're right, assigning blame, and assuming intention. We talked about learning to listen. We approach things from that third story, that neutral narrative has no bias. We take a stance of curiosity. So instead of, hold on, I don't know how to do that. Oh, right. So instead of acting as if we already know what's going on, we ask and find out for real what's actually going on. Don't assume you understand the problem. Ask for help on how to understand the problem. And we have these 3 listening skills: inquiry, again, asking those questions; paraphrasing, restating what it is you heard them say so that they can clear up anything to make sure that you understand. And then we have acknowledgement, which is just giving legitimacy to the other person's feelings. Can anyone tell me what if you are not in the right headspace for a conflict or a difficult conversation? What should you do? I muted everyone, so you'll have to unmute yourself if you want to answer.
Walk away.
Walk away is good, yes. But don't just walk away. You have to communicate why you're walking away.
And run. Set a time that you're going to address it.
Yes. Yes, and you can even say why you need to walk away or why you can't discuss this conflict. Exactly, that's right.
I don't know why.
We talked about creating conversation. And the goal in creating a conversation is to express what you feel the problem is, why you see the situation that way, and how you feel about it, ideally with clarity and confidence. So you start with what matters the most when you are trying to create a healthy conversation within conflict. What was done? How did it make you feel? Why does it bother you? And why is it important to discuss? So when you do this thing, it makes me feel this way. The reason that this bothers me is because of this reason. And what is important to me is this thing. So that's some language for you. Also, when you're creating a conversation within conflict, say what you mean. Don't make them guess. No one is a mind reader, and it takes a lot of extra effort to work through that. You also want to avoid easing in. So don't deliver things indirectly through hints and leading questions. If you want them to do something or if you want to say something, just say it. Don't do things like, do you want to get the kids ready for bed? Also, don't present your conclusions as a truth. You can present them as your opinion or your view. My view is that this thing. I believe that blah, blah, blah. Share where your conclusions come from. Just say why your view is that way and why you believe what you believe and what experiences you've had that make you feel so strongly. Also, don't exaggerate with always and never. because there's rarely going to be an always and never situation. I almost said there's never going to be an always and never situation, but I switched. Working that 40-year-old brain. Last week, we talked a little bit about social media and conflict and kind of set some ground rules for ways to navigate disagreements through social media. We talked about what to do before you post, when you're reading comments. First of all, you need to question your motives and your emotional state. How are you feeling right now? What makes you so angry about this post, and why do you want to post something so bad? Also, get the facts. Check your sources. Make sure it's a reliable source that's sharing that information. You can't just share a picture of a quote, or maybe don't even get worked up over a picture of a quote unless you've actually confirmed that that's what was being said and that's actually true. Do I need to post at all? This thing upsets me. Do I need to post? And would I say it to that person to their face? So if you're going to post something, a good rule of thumb is, and this is of course within a conflicting post, the good rule of thumb is if you cannot say it to their face, do not post it on their Facebook, etc. When you are actually going to post, you need to think about what you're going to say. Don't just word vomit onto the page. And also be clear in your meaning. Use those emojis, use punctuation. These are the things that help make the things that we're saying clear. When face-to-face interaction is removed, we have to use whatever resources we have. And those are those little smiley faces and whatnot. General rules, don't make vague statements on Facebook. Don't say, I'm sad, or I'm mad, or a very vague statement that someone could interpret as you talking to them. You say what you mean, say it with clarity. If things are getting kind of heated, take it to direct message or a phone call or something like that. Don't continue to try to drive your point home on social media if it's causing a big uproar. Reach out to the person that you're having a conflict with and talk to them personally. Oh, got someone waiting to come in. Go. Excuse me. And finally, don't use social media when you're in any kind of super emotional state. If you're super sad, if you're super mad, if you're super whatever, maybe just kind of avoid places that can lure you into getting into an argument with someone. So those are just some general rules to live by. I will send you guys kind of an at a glance dealing with conflict sheet that we've made that I'll get you guys sometime this week. I had literally just remembered that I had it. So again, working that 40-year-old brain. So, okay, we're gonna get started with a video. This TED Talk is about the beauty of conflict. And we're gonna have some discussion questions afterwards and kind of talk about it. I wanna hear your thoughts on what he has to say. And I wanna hear your thoughts in general on conflict. And then we'll wrap it up with a little bit of Jesus, like we like to do, because he's the best. So let's see, I'm gonna share this screen. Yeah, that's right, raise the roof. Okay. So I go to share screen, then share computer sound in the other one, okay. And then that, and then click share. There we go.
I've heard it described as a volcano that's about to erupt, a hurricane. Like slow dancing, barefoot on broken shards of glass. Like trying to hold back the ocean with a broom. War, the plague, like being drawn. These are just a few examples of thousands of metaphors I've collected about conflict. What's conflict like for you? Your metaphor matters because it often reflects how you think and feel about conflict. So it makes sense that if you think conflict is the plague, you'd probably want to avoid that and avoid everybody else that has it too. If it's like trying to hold back the ocean with a broom, I would imagine that feels frustrating and futile. So what do you do when the waves just keep coming? Because conflict washes ashore in all of our relationships, at home, at work, in our neighborhoods. You've probably already been given advice on how you should deal with it. Communicate. But sometimes talking about it seems to make it worse. Don't go to bed angry. So you stay awake and now you're angry and tired. Or you just have to learn to compromise. But if your compromise has ever felt like you don't get what you want, I don't get what I want, but we're just together, we're mutually usable. Now, I'm sure all of this advice is well-intentioned, but it treats conflict as if it's a problem. What if conflict isn't a problem? What if it's a solution? What if it's not negative, but full of beauty? After 15 years of studying, researching, teaching, and training in conflict, I've learned to see it differently. I've been able to see the power it has to transform us, our relationships, and the world around us. It can be difficult, though, to create that change. And it means we have to start looking at conflict differently. No matter how negatively you think about conflict right now, it is possible to change that. It takes 3 keys in order to do that. The first is to recognize what our conflict is really about. I have a 4-decade-long history of fighting about the dishes. When I was a kid, I hated doing dishes, and I fought with my parents and my siblings on nearly a weekly basis about whose turn it was. When I got to college, I fought with my roommates about the dishes because sometimes they'd go home for the weekend and they'd leave behind their dirty dishes with their half-eaten burritos with congealed ketchup and bowls of funky fermenting green Lucky Charm milk in the sink. When I got married, I fought with my wife about how you're supposed to do the dishes and if it even counts as doing dishes if you don't rinse the sink out afterwards. With my own kids, I've fought about the dishes, about them not dirtying 15 cups a day because they get a new one every single time they get a drink of water, and trying to get them to help load and unload the dishes. I mean, maybe I'd have just switched to paper plates. But maybe it's not about the dishes. As I think back, as a kid, it wasn't about the dishes, it was about independence, wanting to make my own decisions. With my roommates, it wasn't about the dishes. It was about wanting to feel respected and wondering if they valued the relationship the same way that I did. With my wife, it's not about how I do the dishes. It's wanting to feel competent and likable no matter how I do them. With my kids, it's not about the dishes. It's about my identity as a father, trying to teach them respect and responsibility. You see, conflicts are a lot like icebergs. What we see on the surface may seem small, but what's underneath can send boats like the Titanic to the bottom of the ocean. And if I don't pay attention to what's underneath my own conflicts, it can rip holes in my relationships. Conflict is about so much more, about our identity, our relationships, the things that really matter to us. And as you're thinking about your own conflicts, maybe you can start to see that they might be about something more. Now, once you recognize what your conflicts are really about, the second key is recognizing when you're stuck. Now, I am no stranger to being stuck in conflict. I started learning about conflict because I was terrible at it. Well, a couple of years ago, I asked my 4-year-old daughter to put away a couple of hair pretties that she had gotten out. You know, hair pretties, like little bows and rubber bands, stuff you put in your hair to make it pretty. So she took them, but she chucked them on the floor of the bathroom. And I said, you can't just put them there on the floor. You need to pick them up and put them in the tray with the rest of the hair pretties. She said, I don't want to put them in the tray. I don't want to do it. And I said, you got them out. You have to put them away. She said, I don't want to. You started throwing a fit. So she's laying on the floor. So I get down on the floor next to her, and I put the little hair pretties right next to her hand, and I bring the tray over, and I'm just like, you just put them in the tray. Okay? And she said, I don't want to, and flips the tray. 20 more hair pretties go flying over the floor. So I'm like, line in the sand. You're not coming out of this bathroom until you pick up all the hair pretties. So she tries to rush past me. I block the door with my gigantic body, and she's flailing at me with her tiny little fists. And then 20 minutes later, I'm at the door trying to explain to my neighbor, who has brought a plate of cookies to welcome us to the neighborhood, why my daughter is screaming, trying to climb over a mattress that I've used to block the bathroom door. Now, that may be entertaining for you, but at the time, for me, not so much. Like, I was stuck. That was not working very well for me. Have you ever been in your own conflicts and thought, this is not working so well for me? See, the thing that gets me stuck there is justification. And justification is believing that I'm blameless. And it's so seductive. Because in conflict, if I'm blameless, then I don't have to do any of the work to change. I'm not the one that needs to change. Somebody else needs to change. And it keeps us stuck. As you think about your own conflicts, do you ever feel justified but stuck? You know, again, that might feel nice in the moment, but in the end, it's pretty dissatisfying. It keeps us doing the same conflicts over and over again, and nothing changes. You can get unstuck. If it's not working for you, you can find a different way. The third key in unlocking the beautiful, transformative power of conflict is to start learning to speak responsibly. To have those kind of conversations where we can create change in ourselves, in our relationships, in the world around us, it requires vulnerability, ownership, communication, acceptance, boundaries. It's hard work, though. It can be as hard as trying to learn a new language. I've created the acronym VOCAB to help you in those moments to think about how you can be responsible in your conflict, how you can create the change that you want. And it starts with vulnerability. Vulnerability is my willingness to let myself be seen, to share who I really am, how I really feel, even my mistakes, to share the needs that I have that are below the surface. Now, when I'm vulnerable, I take off my armor of justification and defensiveness. I put down my weapons of blame and accusation. And that can be terrifying. But it's beautiful because it disarms our conflicts and it creates the potential for us to connect instead of to fight. The O in vocab is for ownership. And ownership is taking accountability for my own needs, emotions, and choices. Have you ever wondered in a conflict, like, how did I get here? Maybe you're in the proverbial doghouse and you're sleeping on the couch. Or maybe your conflicts have escalated into the ridiculous and you have a mattress blocking the door of your bathroom. The beauty of ownership is when I look at my choices and my emotions in my conflicts, it starts to help me map the contributions that I make. I can see how I got here. I can see exactly which direction I'm headed. And if that's not working for me, it empowers me. I can shift direction. The third thing you need, and at the center of vocab, is our communication. We have to learn to ask, listen, and express. It's not enough that we communicate. It matters how we do it. So I had to learn to stop telling stories that ended with a period. I had to start asking questions, the kind of questions that help me understand what's underneath the surface of this conflict, to help me understand the emotions and needs. After I ask, I can listen. Not listening for the other person to make a mistake or for me to get defensive, but to listen to what's really important here, to hear their requests for change. And after listening, I can then express. Not just anger, but express with vulnerability and ownership how I really feel, what I want, what's important to me. And these conversations where I start to ask, listen, and express, they're so beautiful because they can create empathy and a different type of conversation. The A in vocab is about acceptance. And acceptance is embracing reality and letting go of what we can't control. There's very little that I can control in conflict. I can't even get my 4-year-old daughter to pick up 3 hair pretties. I often want to control how the other person feels and how they behave, but I have to let that go. I also have to recognize that because conflict is about change, there's going to be some loss involved. And sometimes it's just the loss of an idea. Once upon a time, I thought the relationships were supposed to be happily ever after. But the truth is, all relationships have conflict. And until I let go of that fairy tale and embrace the reality of my relationships, could I do anything when those difficulties came? Finally, the B in vocab is for boundaries. And boundaries are ground rules for acceptable behavior. Boundaries let other people know what I'm okay with and what I'm not okay with. This is important because even though it's difficult to say no and disappoint somebody, no is the foundation of trust. As a mediator, my role is to help people who are stuck in conflict to have a different kind of conversation. And the way we often begin that is by setting rules for how we're going to interact. It usually involves things like the parties determining we're not going to call each other names. We won't raise our voices. We're going to keep this conversation confidential. And the beauty of that is setting those boundaries and respecting them creates the foundation for trust. Now, understanding vocab, seeing how that works, isn't going to cure your conflicts. It's still difficult to do, and I still get stuck in justification. But when I practice it, just like practicing a new language, I become more fluent. And it's important because that is what creates the changes that I want in myself, in my relationships, and in the world around me. When my oldest daughter turned 6 and started the first grade, there started to be a lot of interactions with her sisters that ended with tears and yelling. She started to be kind of harsh. I mean, she'd always liked to be in charge, but she was kind of bossing her sisters around a lot. So I tried to put a stop to it. I lectured her on kindness, and nothing changed. I yelled at her. Nothing changed. I gave consequences and punishments, and it continued for weeks on nearly a daily basis. And I felt stuck. I didn't know what to do, and it was frustrating. Until one evening, I started practicing vocab and creating a conversation for change. As I was tucking her into bed, I kneeled down next to her, and I called her name softly, and I said, I don't know how to be the dad of a 6-year-old. I've never done this before, but I've been worried and sad. I don't know what's been going on between us and between your sisters. And I hate that I've yelled at you. I have to own that. I don't want that. What I want is for us to be able to talk with each other, even when it's hard. I want us to have a good relationship. And I want to understand what's happening for you. Can you help me understand? And she said, I don't know, and crawled under the covers. So I worked on keeping my heart open. I laid next to her. I tried to breathe in and let go of my desire to have her respond. And then I had the air ripped out of me when I heard her say, Dad, have you ever been bullied? And for weeks, she'd been dealing with a bully at school and hadn't known what to do about it, how to talk about it. I asked her how she was feeling. I told her about how I was bullied when I was a kid. We discussed how she could set boundaries with kids at school. We talked about how do we want to communicate in the future? How do we deal with these hard emotions when they come? And that conversation changed me. And it changed our relationship. And it empowered us to continue creating the changes we wanted in the world around us. I no longer see conflict as negative. It's my chrysalis of change. It's a doorway of opportunity. It's the first ray of light after a dark night. What do you want it to be for you?
All right. So there we go. Got to unmute. So Claire was his name. I felt did a great job of talking about some positive things that come from conflict. And I don't know if you guys noticed, he mentioned a few things that we'd been talking about over the past several weeks. Just want you guys to know that I'm legit. Somebody else says it too. It's not just me making this stuff up. But at the very beginning, I don't know if you guys could hear or not because I had my sound on, but he used several metaphors for conflict. Which one resonated the most with you on how conflict feels? Or do you have your own metaphor for conflict?
I forgot exactly how he said it, but it was something like sweeping the waves or and I
Like
thought the
stop.
idea that sometimes it just keeps coming and coming and coming. To me that was a good word picture for that.
Yeah, it's like you're what's trying to stop the ocean with a broom,
Yeah,
something to that extent. Like there's just so much, and a broom is basically worthless. Like what's it even going to do with a massive amount of water?
right.
So sometimes conflict can be so layered, and there can be so much of it that you just feel like you're just sweeping away some droplets, and you still can't contain the massive amount of waves that are coming in. What else? Hey, Chris, how long should I wait with no one answering to go on to the next question? Let's see. He talked about
15 seconds.
yeah. um, what is some bad advice that you have been given about conflict in the past?
I always just think the don't go to bed angry thing is really dumb because, like, to be honest, most of the time when I'm angry, the issue is just that I need a nap. So, like, going to bed is the best possible solution to the problem.
Yeah, avoiding it at all costs is really bad advice, I think.
Yes. I think a lot of us have been kind of told to just avoid it. Just don't make the waves. Don't be a part of that. And you know, all of us are a little nicer after a nap. That is like the truest thing. So he mentions conflict as he describes it as an iceberg. And then he talks about how he's been fighting about dishes for decades. So when is doing the dishes not about the dishes? What does he mean when he says it's like an iceberg?
But the visible part of the conflict is dishes, but there's the important part of the conflict is about independence and respect and larger issues.
Mm-hmm. Well, we talked about that a couple of weeks ago, and we actually used the dishes metaphor. One guy was like always wanted to do the dishes afterwards, and then the other person didn't want to do the dishes, and they both had completely different reasons why and perfectly justifiable motivations for why they were doing what they were doing. And an iceberg looks pretty tiny, but there's a lot of stuff underneath there that contributes to it. And it's the same thing with conflict. Very rarely does someone immediately get furious about the dishes, but there could have been a lot of things building up to that. And that's what we talked about when we avoid the conflict, that those are just a little bit of kindling for that fire that's going to come up later. And that fire is going to erupt when someone doesn't do the dishes that was supposed to, and you feel not listened to or disrespected or something like that again. And that's when you lose your mind over the dishes. So it's not the dishes, it's a bunch of other stuff that's built up to it. Have any of you ever, he talks about being stuck in conflict, talks about drawing a line in the sand with the hair pretties. And guys, I have a Pop-Tart story about Betsy that I will tell you sometime. I wish I thought to have the pictures pulled up, but you get caught in a conflict and you just kind of dig in and you've drawn that line in the sand. Have any of you guys ever experienced just being stuck in a conflict before? Yes. Can you give me an example?
Yeah, I think, I don't know, you may not be able to hear me, my AirPods kind of mess up sometimes, but I think, yeah, on social media, like there's a lot of those times where, especially whether with politics and stuff, like you both like are so grounded in what you believe, it's hard for anybody to move in that thing. And on both sides, you feel like you have such a like obvious reasoning for why you believe what you believe. And so I know that's where I've found a lot of conflict, even within my own family and stuff. And because a lot of times for me, it's like, I'm just talking about people here. Like, I'm not even talking about politics. I'm just talking about like caring for others. And it's this, and so it's hard to not dig in with that. And I definitely feel that, but like, I think as I've gone through that I've really just started speaking over the past few months, but as I started going through that, I started to realize the reasons why we dig in more because like it's always coming from some kind of good place, or else we wouldn't dig in. Like nobody's digging in because they hate something. And sometimes it's how it feels on the other side. It's like, why do you not care in this way? But it's not that. So I know that's definitely what I've experienced quite a bit.
You know, no one's going to fight over something they don't care about. But it is easy to get stuck, especially when you feel justified in the emotions that you're experiencing in your perspective. Like you're justified in how you feel. Why can't the other person see that and make moves to fix it? So the important thing to remember there is maybe you are justified. That person probably feels justified too. Now, sure, you're probably right, but still have to make that effort to understand why there's a conflict and get to the why of their passions there. And then sometimes, never mind. Okay. I was about to tell a story, but I'm not going to take too long. So how can we speak in a way that uncovers what's underneath the conflict?
Asking questions.
Yes, Lynn. That's a really important part of trying to figure out what's going on there.
Also really thinking about like why we think this is important before we bring it up or start an argument about it. Because I know there's been times for me where like I'll start basically start an argument with Ben over something that doesn't really matter. And we're halfway through the fight before I'm like, wait, just a minute. I am not mad about the laundry. I'm mad we haven't gone out in a while. Like, I realize it's something totally different. And so I think, like, when you're getting irritated or starting to have these emotional reactions to something, trying to step back and say, okay, what is actually causing this feeling, so that you know where you stand before you're in a conflict with the other person.
Yes, working that self-reflection muscle is key and an extremely important part of being able to work through a conflict in a healthy way. So if you don't know why you're mad, if you don't know why you're fighting about it, then you're not going to get, I mean, you could be mad at Ben for not doing the laundry, and then he does the laundry, you're still going to feel mad. So why is that? That's a great point. You've got to ask questions, get to the why. You've got to work that self-reflective muscle quite a bit.
I think another part on the asking questions, and I experienced this just with a few family members, of sometimes you do have to dig in a little bit. Like, even though it is hard, I've learned that. I know maybe this is going off, so you can shoot me down, Anna Jane, all the time. But because there's been a few times where I had to ask some really hard questions and dig into that conflict a little bit before I got an honest answer from the person I was talking to. And then then you get to, I'm not going to talk about the ones that I got to because they're a little more personal, but just like, it's like, oh wow, like it's this. It's like so much bigger than I realized. And so I know that was important in some of the conversations I've had.
Well, yeah, you have to, I mean, that's the importance of asking those questions. You're not going to ask one question and then they're going to be able to answer it, and then you know what's going on with that conflict. It's a process. Most people aren't very good at self-reflecting and understanding truly what has led up to this point of anger or this point of conflict. So you do have to dig in a little bit and ask those questions to find out the real reason why someone is mad about the laundry not being done. We're going with that example from now on, Kaylee. Thank you. What are some...
So naughty.
You talked about healthy boundaries a little bit as part of his vocab, vulnerability, openness, communication, accountability, and boundaries. Got it. He talked about the boundaries last, ways to set healthy boundaries in conflict. He talked about, as a mediator, we usually start out all mediations with a list of kind of house rules that will allow for a smoother discussion of the conflict. And, it's don't yell, don't call names. If you're feeling overwhelmed, you can ask for 5 minutes. Like, these are kind of rules that most mediators have in place. And those rules are important because people feel safe within boundaries.
What's up?
And when you have that safety, it's easier to be able to communicate. So what are some healthy boundaries that you can set for you each individually? You all don't have to answer, but I just want you to take a moment to think about knowing who you are in conflict and your conflict style. What are some healthy boundaries you can set to work towards resolving conflicts? What are some things that you think you need in order to be able to resolve and work through a conflict?
Change tone of voice.
Change your tone of voice. Yes, sometimes you can't hear a person when they're yelling at you, or you can't communicate yourself when you are yelling. That's a good boundary to set, that, hey, if we're going to have a discussion about this right now, if we're going to be in conflict, then let's make a rule that we speak calmly and we change the tone of our voice from anger to attentive understanding. Yes, so yes, that was wonderful. Anything?
I think we've talked about time. Like now's not the time. It's not going to work now. So let's come back to it. So
Right.
that's, I don't know how you do that. Time out or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, whatever rules you set for your household there or your life, if you need time. So for me personally, I I process out loud. Chris does not. So we have to respect that about each other. And so it usually involves me saying a bunch of stuff and then going away for a little bit so Chris can process, and then I can kind of think through, and then I'll come back and I'll say some more stuff, and then he'll think about it, and then I'll think about it, and it's a whole thing. But we usually get there in the end. But those are some rules we've set. I know he needs that space to process quietly. So I give that to him, and he knows I need to say my words. And he allows me to and does his best to listen in that moment. Other boundaries you think would be healthy?
Not bringing up things that have already been resolved or forgiven.
That's actually a really interesting thing that you brought up, Kaylee, because yes, you need to focus on what's at hand when you guys are working through something. So I find it interesting. Why is that being brought up? Has it actually been resolved, or is it something that's just been simmering underneath for a while and happens to come out in that moment? So as far as boundaries go, this can be one of your rules. We're going to talk about this thing for now. And if we need to talk about the other later, then we can do that. But we kind of got to focus on one thing at a time. Let's see if we can squeeze out one more before we go to the next thing. You have anything?
Don't you think that it depends a lot on personalities too?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean,
Because
go ahead, Jonna.
no, I was just going to say, because, you know, my mom and I used to have conflict all the time, and it would be so crazy. It would be over something so little. And I'd tell her all the time, I say, I don't want conflict. I don't like conflict. And so it was just her personality at times that she could just, you know, the littlest thing could just create conflict. And it's just like, you know, so I think a lot of time it's just the personality of the individual that maybe they want conflict when the.
Yeah, some people enjoy a good fight. They like to throw some stuff out there to see what happens, and it can kind of jump off the handle a little bit. Oh, I see your hand, Charlotte. Just one second. That's where that self-awareness comes in, that it's so important. If you know that you're that kind of person, then you need to think about the best way that you can communicate in conflict within where you fall naturally as a person and what your natural tendencies are. Charlotte, yes?
I think sometimes conflict is a habit. It was a sad thing for me to hear my dad say, not long after my mother died, that he really missed fighting with her.
You really missed what?
Fighting with her.
Oh.
Words.
Yeah, there's a level of comfort in how you are in your world, how you are with your spouse or your siblings, or even if there's fighting there. If it's a consistent method that you've kind of learned to live with a little bit, then yeah, I understand that there would be you would miss those conflicts that can bring up emotions and allow you guys to explore. And actually, that's actually a great thing to think about if we want to talk about some of the beauty of conflict, that would be a really great example. That beauty that from conflict comes the closeness. So as you travel through life with someone and you're going to have conflicts with that person, that's what brings you closer together. Those deeper relationships, those more tender relationships are forged with fire in a lot of ways, and that's what makes them stronger. And so as you're fighting and working through that conflict, you're growing together as long as you can resolve it. That's going to be a key. Like, the fights are going to always come, the fights are always going to happen, but the focus needs to be on the resolution and the personal growth as a result of it. John, just like you and your mom were so close, even though you guys would get into those little headbutting kind of instances, but conflict allows you to know another side of someone. And the more you know about someone, the more you're able to love them completely. And that's a really beautiful thing. And the conflict creates empathy, because when you listen to someone else's perspective and you take that time to understand why they're upset, it grows your emotional intelligence as much as it grows their self-awareness. So conflict, when done right, really does pave a path of peacemaking, because it allows for that empathy, it allows for that personal growth, it allows for the self-awareness and the understanding that makes relationships so strong. I'm going to shift to a couple of Bible verses now. Does anyone have anything they'd like to add before I do? Yes, Susan.
So I think, and this might fall under beautiful, I very much wish that Claire had shared with us, upon reflection, what he wished he had done about the hair pretties. Like, he wished he had. Because I have a conflict. I think like probably 75% of my job as a teacher is, well, I know I shouldn't say that. I think what makes me the tiredest as a teacher is controlling my natural urge for conflict, because it is conflict all day long, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's conflict between me and students, it's conflict between students and students. And I currently have an interesting situation, I think not that different from the hair bows, but with a 14-year-old. And so this particular student has not turned in one single assignment in 5 weeks, not
Ooh.
one. And she gripes at the teachers in the chat, but she doesn't unmute and talk she will not provide any responses, and she will not ask questions in the chat.
This is being recorded.
And so then my para and I have been talking with her, asking her to come into meetings with us, right? And she will not come into these private meetings to talk to us. And she was putting in the chat, "It's so dumb. Y'all are so dumb, because I'm already in the meeting. Why are you inviting me into a meeting?" And she won't come into the meetings. I feel like that's the hair bow thing, or the hair pretty thing. We called it hair bows here, but hair pretty. And I feel like I would love to have known, because I think that there's such a big like difference between what his daughter needed to learn about her own responsibility, and like, if dad says pick up your hair bows, you really should do that. And like, the conflict that I might have with Gary about the dishwasher, right? Or something like that. So I guess the goal or the purpose of the conflict seems like it matters to me a lot. And I'm mulling that over and wondering if it is like of course, when I'm in the heat of the moment over the dishwasher, I don't really have time to think about my goal. But as a teacher, I guess I have to think about my goal. And I don't know. I guess I'm just processing out loud. I'm using my words, and thank you for listening to them. But I do wonder if you have anything to say about the difference between the conflict that arises between siblings or spouses or on social media, and conflict that is a part of the training of children.
Right. Well, that's a very simple question to answer. Yeah, I doubt that if Claire was here, I wish he was, because I just think he is such a great speaker. I'd love to hear him more, but if Claire were here, I feel like he would probably say he wouldn't really necessarily want to do something different there, because he is teaching those boundaries. But I wonder what would have happened if he had asked, why don't you want to put up the hair pretties? Just to see what she said. So he never did ask that why question. Now, with the 4-year-old, that resonated with me so strongly, because I have a 3-year-old and she has opinions on how things should be done and what she wants to do and what she doesn't want to do. And usually, because I'm the parent and I'm right in this situation, I'm teaching her boundaries and responsibility and choices and things like that, I feel like I'm justified in drawing the line there and saying, well, you can't leave the bathroom until you put up the hair pretties. But there is some danger in being justified there. With the parent and the child, teaching those boundaries, teaching those responsibility, I think is the job. And I can't speak as a teacher, but it sounds like you're doing all the things that you can do. And if she's not responding to them, then I don't know. You can't control what she's going to do. You can only control what you and your parent are doing. It sounds like you're doing that. And maybe there's continuous attempts will allow her to, maybe you'll catch her at a vulnerable moment when she feels like opening up. But that is something I will pray about on your behalf, Susan, because that's tough. I don't envy all the things that you have to do as an educator right now in a school with some tough kids.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the prayers. I always need prayers, because I can't do this job without the Spirit. But I guess probably, fussing with her in the chat of the meeting is probably not my best approach then.
Right. A phone call might be good there, or a more intimate reach out might allow her to, she doesn't have to put on any airs maybe as much or anything like that. So it might be better to do a little one-on-one or 2-on-1 kind of conversation over the phone, or 6 feet away with coffee. I don't know, however that's going to work for you guys, but sounds like you've got a few ideas, and I hope that they work for you. Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 8 through 10, we're gonna read that. He says, even if I caused you sorrow by my letter, I do not regret it. No, I did regret it. I see that my letter hurt you, but only for a little while. Yet now I'm happy, not because you were made sorry, but because your sorrow led to your repentance. For you became sorrowful as God intended, and so were not harmed in any way by us. Godly sorrow brings repentance that leads to salvation and leaves no regret, but worldly sorrow brings death. So Paul had an issue with the Corinthian church. He writes a letter about it, and it caused some conflict. And he's like, I regret it, but I don't. So it's very much like a hashtag sorry, not sorry kind of moment that Paul was having there. He spoke what he was seeing, and he called out their choices, and that made them sad. It made them feel guilty. And that led to change. And that's one of the nice things about conflict, when we're able to work through to work through some of that dissension together. You don't ever want to make a person feel bad when you're having a fight with them, or maybe you do, I don't know. Whenever you're in conflict, ultimately, I don't think the goal is to make them feel shame about the things that they're doing, but helping them recognize their part in the conflict and you recognizing your part in the conflict is a way to fix that relationship. So that's the guilt. You feel bad for the thing that you did, and you try to fix it. And sometimes you're not gonna feel bad until someone calls you out on it. And so the Corinthian church didn't feel bad about the things that they were doing until Paul called them out, and it made them sad, and they were mad about it. But there was a godly grief there that they were able to work through. So it's a positive use of guilt. Paul wasn't shaming them as Christians, as people, but he was calling out their bad choices. And in conflict, when we are calling out bad choices that we see, it's important to be aware of how we're calling that out, that we're calling out the actions and not the person. Like, we're calling out what that person did, that bad choice that person made, as opposed to just that bad person. And language is so important when you are in a conflict with someone. And language is not going to come out nice the first time, but it's that willingness to work through it that will allow for that godly grief on both sides. 8:30. Oh, we need to wrap up. I want to wrap up. I want to finish with 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 16 through 20. So then, from this point on, we won't recognize people by human standards. Even though we used to know Christ by human standards, that isn't how we know him now. So then, if anyone is in Christ, that person is part of the new creation. The old things have gone away, and look, new things have arrived. All of these new things are from God, who reconciled us to himself through Christ, and who gave us the ministry of reconciliation. In other words, God was reconciling the world to himself through Christ by not counting people's sins against them. He has trusted us with this message of reconciliation. So we are ambassadors who represent Christ. God is negotiating with you through us. We beg you as Christ's representatives to be reconciled to God. My actual degree, the official title is Conflict Resolution and Reconciliation. So the goal of all conflicts, the goal of conflict resolution is to restore something that is broken. That's what reconciliation is. It's restoring something that is broken. So if you think about it, the world was broken, is broken. And God, the whole like ministry of the cross was about reconciliation, was about God making his move towards us through Christ. God wanting to be closer to us, so he sends Christ to reconcile our brokenness so that we can live in a relationship with him. And now, for all of you, and for me, it's our job now that, because we know God, we know Christ, and we know the power of the cross. And now you guys know all about conflict resolution. So like it is our job to carry out that ministry of reconciliation. It's our job to be those that make peace, because that is what God has done for us. God didn't look down on us and hate us. God didn't shame us for our choices. God took the first steps to meet us where we are in order to show us how to restore ourselves. And we use that example when we see brokenness in the world around us, when we see a broken person. We don't stand in our justification and wait for them to come to us. We, as God did, go to them and meet them where they are and work on restoring the things that are broken. And that's my prayer for you guys and for myself, because it is not an easy thing to do, but it's something that I hope you can be thinking about, especially over the next several weeks, as we're still in a pandemic, and as we still have political unrest, and as we still have all these things that make us uncomfortable and sad and angry, that's making everybody else uncomfortable and sad and angry too. And someone has to be better and willing to meet that brokenness where it is. And I pray that we can do that. I thank you guys very much for listening to me talk for 6 weeks, for 6 sessions. I hope that if you ever have any questions or anything like that, that you won't hesitate to reach out and let me know. And my prayer is that you go out and make peace and show each other that Christ-filled love and graciousness that we have been blessed with ourselves. So go, make peace, be happy and well-fed and all those wonderful things. And love you guys. And that's all.